My name is Inchi Bowman. I'm serving as the moderator today. We welcome Professor Robert Eisen to the Rumi Forum. He is Professor of Religion and Director of the Judaic Studies at the George Washington University here in DC. His areas of interest include medieval and modern Jewish philosophy, biblical interpretation, Jewish ethics, and comparative religion. He has published widely, including a number of books. One is Gersonides on Providence, Covenant, and the Chosen People. And the other title is The Book of Job in Medieval Jewish Philosophy. He also edited with Charles Mannequin another book, Philosophers and the Jewish Bible. Currently, he is working on another volume which examines Jewish perspectives on peace and violence. Professor Eisen is also active as a consultant on issues of religion and international conflict, with a particular interest in fostering better relations between the West and the Islamic world. Professor Eisen.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Roman, for agreeing to moderate. And I want to thank Ali Yutzaver, who I know couldn't be here today, for inviting me to speak here. I know a little bit about the Rumi Forum. I'd like to get to know more, and I'm an admirer of its principles and of the work that it does. As was noted in the introduction, I have been active in interfaith dialogue and peacemaking between Jews, Christians, and Muslims for several years now, both on the national and on the international level. And an important part of my work has been the relationship between Jews and Muslims, and for obvious reasons. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has brought Jews and Muslims into conflict. And so therefore the relationship between Jews and Muslims is very important for me as a Jew. But it's also important for me just as a person, and that's because the Israeli-Palestinian conflict really involves the entire world. I often say that the fault line between the West and the Islamic world runs through that tiny piece of land that some people call Israel and some people call Palestine. And therefore the relationship between Jews and Muslims is really critical in some sense for the relationship between the West and the Islamic world, and therefore really for world peace. And so I've spent a lot of time trying to understand this conflict. And what I'd like to do today is to share some insights that I've been developing about it. The insights are in their infancy, meaning that they are not well developed yet. I'm just beginning to formulate these thoughts. And I would love to have your feedback, especially in the things that I say about Islam. Now, this is something that Jenna and I were actually talking about beforehand, one of the major challenges in peacemaking is to be able to get into the mind and heart of those who are in conflict. You need to think, you need to feel what the parties to the conflict are thinking and feeling. It is not easy to do. Now, in my case, it's obviously been much easier for me to relate to the Jewish side of the conflict because I am Jewish. It's been harder for me to relate to the Muslim side, but I've invested a lot of time in this, both through my intellectual study of Islam over the years, as well as trying very hard to listen and to feel what Muslims, to listen to Muslims and to feel what they're feeling. And what I've discovered over time is that there are some remarkable similarities between the two sides regarding the motivations for this conflict that are generally not acknowledged. It involves religion, it involves history. And yet the understanding of those similarities are often not discussed, and they could be, an understanding of them could be crucial for bringing peace between the two sides. If the two sides realized how much they share in common, maybe this would help lead to peace. What I'm going to do is that in the next 25 minutes I'm going to go through an awful lot of detail. I'm going to be talking about the Jewish side of this conflict and then also the Muslim side of this conflict as I understand it. So if it appears like I'm just throwing a lot of stuff at you, my hope is that in the last few minutes, if you're still swimming, I'll put it to, I'm hoping that you'll see the pattern that I'm trying to develop that really involves the entire history of these two sides. And for those of you who are Muslims, please be forgiving of any misinterpretations, mistakes. I am a student of Islam and do not know it as well as I know my own faith and my own history, but I'm doing my best here. So, if you have criticisms, just be gentle. I'm really trying my best. Let me start with the Jewish side, which is the side that I know the best. In order to understand the Jewish side of the Middle East conflict, one has to understand Zionism. And many people in the Muslim world, in the Arab world and beyond, are very harshly critical of Zionism. It's often demonized as the worst possible evil. But what I often find is that people who take this position make very little attempt to actually understand what it is. And what you find is that when you get to know Zionism and you get to know why Jews are so attached to it, you find that Zionism is the product of human fears, vulnerabilities, and longings, and that Jews are supporters of Zionism for very human reasons. Let me fill in the details a little bit here. Zionism has to be understood against the background of the entirety of Jewish history. We're talking about a history that goes back 3,000 years. For the first 1,000 years, Jews lived in their land, in their homeland, which they called the land of Israel. The land of Israel was critical to their national identity. It was also critical to their religious identity. In the Bible, if you take a look at the biblical narrative and the biblical history, what you see is that the land is central to the covenant between God and the Jewish people. It's all about the land, the land, the land. If Jews obey God's will, they will be rewarded with prosperity and they will live in their land. If they do not obey God's will, they will be punished with the lack of prosperity and they will be exiled from their land. Now, as it turns out, that actually happens. In the first century of the Common Era, we're talking now after 1,000 years that Jews were living in their land, they go into a period which they call the exile, because it's in this era, in this period, in the first century, that Rome destroys the Jewish Commonwealth. And Jews, well, some of them still live in the land of Israel, but they are scattered in various parts of the world. The vast majority of Jews live under Christian and Muslim rule throughout the Middle Ages. And so this is the period that is formally known as the exile, according to Jewish thinking. In both empires, under Christians and Muslims, again, this is where you need to get into the Jewish mentality. Jews will tell you that they were mistreated by both Muslims and Christians. They were treated far worse by Christians, and I want to talk just a little bit about that. Jews were regarded as, first of all, the Jews were the ones that Jesus was supposed to have come to in order to be their savior, and they rejected him. The New Testament also strongly implies that it's the Jews that were responsible for the death of Jesus. And so Christians despise Jews because of these two issues. And so throughout the Middle Ages, Jews were subject to discriminatory laws. They could be expelled at any time from the territories that they lived in. This was a horrible punishment. It's not like today where if you get expelled from somewhere, you get on a plane or you get in your car and you try to find refuge in another territory. When Jews were expelled from Christian territories, they literally had to, walk or sail to some other destination. And thousands of Jews throughout history died trying to find refuge in other places when they were expelled from Christian lands. And this happened almost in every century in various places. The worst of all were the wholesale massacres of Jewish communities. The first instance of this, the first really serious instances of this occurred during the Crusades. Now, interesting, Muslims, have a very negative view of the Crusades as well. Jews also suffered terribly here with the Christian Crusades as well. They were often in the way of these, the armies of Christians moved across Europe on the way to the Holy Land to fight the Muslims, but they found Jewish communities along the way and said, well, these are our enemies as well. And so we have the first wholesale massacres. Entire communities were wiped out by the Crusaders as they marched across Europe. And there were many other instances that I couldn't possibly go through in a short time. Let me just mention one other instance, however, that is really seared into the memory of Jews, and that involves the persecutions of 1648 and 1649, when Ukrainian Cossacks killed 100,000 Jews and wiped out 300 Jewish communities. Before the Holocaust, this was considered to be really the worst thing that had happened to the Jewish community. And you know, then the reports that one gets through the literature of this series of events was really quite horrific. Now, in Muslim lands, Jews were treated a lot better. They still had serious disadvantages, but they were treated a lot better. They were one of the peoples of the book, one of the al-Kitab, and therefore they had certain privileges. They were also considered a protected minority. You know, they were under the title of the dhimmi, those who were a protected minority. But the thing that Muslims and people generally have to understand is that even though they were treated much better under Muslims, they were not equal to Muslims. There were discriminatory laws that limited their activities as well. There was a poll tax, the jizya, that also was a burden on Jewish communities. There was occasional violence against Jewish communities as well, so that, for instance, in the 1100s, the Almohads invaded Spain and Jews had to flee because the Almohads were threatening anyone who was not a Muslim, and this included Jews and Christians, with death if they didn't convert to Islam. But the biggest problem was just a sense of humiliation that you see throughout Jewish literature in the Middle Ages, of Jews feeling that it was fine to live with the Muslims as long as you knew your place, as long as you knew that you were a second-class citizen. Now, the Jews regarded all of this simply as punishment for sin. You know, the Jews had sinned and therefore they'd been exiled. But eventually, at the end of history, Jews would go back to their homeland. God would send a Messiah to bring the Jews back to their homeland and to restore their kingdom. And in the process, God would also take revenge on the enemies of the Jews, on their overlords. So there was this anger that has always been there, and it was there for centuries as Jews were subjugated to other peoples. Now, an interesting thing happens along the way to the Messianic kingdom. In the 1800s, in Europe, big changes happen. Jews, in a rather stunning set of moves, you know, Jews have been living there for hundreds of years, being persecuted. In a stunning series of changes over a series of decades, Jews are invited to become citizens of European democracies. Democracy now comes into fashion in Europe. There's human rights now, and Jews are given all of these privileges and are suddenly citizens, equal citizens with Christians in Europe. Now, there were a different set of reactions to this. Some Jews completely embraced European culture to the point of leaving Judaism entirely. They were fed up, you know, having been part of this separate community, and so they gladly accepted the Christian faith. There were others on the other end who completely rejected these developments and said, no, we still want to live as a separate people. The most extreme were the ultra-Orthodox, who really stayed in separate communities. But most Jews tried to find some sort of compromise between European culture and Jewish culture to live as citizens in both worlds. And that's why, mind you, we have these various denominations that have arisen in Judaism over the years. They are all attempts to try to compromise in one way or another between Jewish and European culture. But this euphoria that Jews felt at everything having changed didn't last that long. By the end of the 1800s, hatred against Jews resurfaced again in Europe. And the worst example of this, or the worst instances of this, occurred in Eastern Europe and in Russia. Beginning in 1880, there were a series of anti-Jewish riots that began killing Jews. And over the next 30 years, tens of thousands of Jews would be killed in Russia and in Eastern Europe. And you have to understand that for Jews, there was an incredible sense of disillusionment. They thought all of this was past them. They thought that this era of persecution was something of the past, and they were shocked in disbelief that, in fact, it had not passed. And many began to say there is no hope for Jews in Europe. And so there was a movement that arose in response to these events to leave Europe entirely and to go back to the ancient homeland. And that's the movement that we call Zionism. Now, for some Jews, this Zionism was a rebellion against religion. Some Jews said, we're tired of waiting for a Messiah, we're tired of waiting for God. We're going to go back, we're going to take back our homeland, you know, by force if we have to, but we need a homeland. For others, Zionism was the fulfillment of Jewish religion. They said, well, what we need to do is go back to our homeland and kind of help the Messianic process along. If we settle our homeland, the Messiah, God will look upon us with favor. He will bring the Messiah, and so therefore we have to settle our own homeland. But all Zionists, whether they were religious or non-religious, agreed that the Jewish state was needed to give Jews refuge from persecution and also to give them back their sense of dignity. And again, you know, one has to understand here that this wasn't just a physical thing, it was a psychological issue. It was getting back to that glorious past when Jews lived as free and independent people in their own homeland. And so Zionists begin to buy land in Palestine and to create settlements. And then in the middle of all of this, of course, comes the Holocaust, in which a third of the Jewish people is killed, 6 million Jews, which of course made the creation of a Jewish homeland even more urgent. But one has to emphasize that there was already centuries worth of persecution that made this very urgent. So Israel was created by a vote in the UN in 1947. And for Jews, this was seen as being a great triumph. Or was it? Well, it turned out that it wasn't, because Israel did not solve the problem. And in fact, in some ways, it made the problem even worse. Jews were now, in some sense, more insecure than they were before, because what even before the creation of Israel, the early Zionists discovered that Palestinians and Arabs in surrounding countries saw the Jews as invaders. And so violence began to erupt between the two. And when the state was created, the Arab nations waged war against Israel. And for Jews, again, one has to kind of see inside the Jewish mentality here, the Arabs and the Muslims began to look like all the other enemies that Jews had and that they had ever faced. You have to understand that for Jews, Arabs, Muslims, Christians, Nazis, they're all the same. You know, they all look the same. They all were just this sort of faceless other, this enemy other, that had always subjugated them and caused them grief. And at present, you have to understand as well that Israel still, Jews feel a sense of vulnerability. They still feel the precariousness of their situation. You have Hamas on one border that lobs rockets, 7,000, 8,000 rockets into Israel, and is sworn to the destruction of Israel. You have Hezbollah on the northern border with their missiles pointed at Israel. And you have an Iranian president who threatens to wipe Israel off the map and is developing nuclear weapons. And so Jews continue to feel their vulnerability. So to sum this half up, I realize I've gone through a lot of material here, but let me just kind of get to the main points. Jewish history begins with sovereignty over many centuries in their homeland. But the majority of Jewish history, 2,000 years of it, has been a struggle to get back that security and get back that dignity that came with the freedom and independence of the biblical era. The creation of the State of Israel was meant to do that, but it hasn't really succeeded. Israel exists in a hostile environment, and its survival is in question. Complicating matters here is that not all Jews have moved to Israel. The majority have not. And that's because of the fact that Jews have a very complicated relationship with the Western world. Because while the picture that I've painted here is one in which Jews suffered terribly in Christian Europe, Jews also were very attracted to European culture. Many did not become Zionists. They wanted to be Europeans. And in America today, there are many Jews who do not want to move to Israel. They want to be Americans. And so there's this complicated relationship that Jews have with their homeland. Okay, now if this is not too much to absorb, I'm now going to try the Muslim side. And here, I'm again on shakier territory, but I'm going to do my best. What I see here is a similar story. In the first centuries of the Muslim history, you have great triumph. You have Muslims conquering large parts of the world, and establishing a massive empire that extends from North Africa practically all the way to India in the 7th and 8th centuries. And Muslims, what you find in early Muslim literature is this sense that this is an indication, the fact that Islam was able to grow so quickly and with such success, this is a sign of God's favor. And that favor seems to continue, because as you go through the first many centuries of Muslim history, you find that Muslims had a superior culture, certainly superior to Christian Europe in most areas. They were more successful economically. They were more successful militarily. They had more advanced science, more advanced philosophy, more advanced art. But after many centuries, this superiority begins to erode. By the time we get to the late Middle Ages, the superiority of the Islamic empire begins to erode from a military and from an economic standpoint. Now, I want to be careful here. Bernard Lewis offended a lot of Muslims when he wrote his book, What Went Wrong, by equating military and economic power with Islam. I don't want to make that same mistake. When I talk about decline here, I'm simply talking about material decline, economic and military decline, not the decline of Islam as a rich culture and a rich religion. That continued. And one shouldn't confuse the two. The decline, again, that I'm speaking about is primarily a decline in the military and economic sphere. Now, some feel that this went back very far, that even in the 14th century with the invasion of the Mongols, which devastated large parts of the Islamic Empire, that the decline had already set in. But whatever your historical view, everybody agrees that by the time we get to the 1800s, the Islamic Empire was in decline in comparison with Christian Europe. And what made things a lot worse was the fact that Europeans began to exert influence over parts of the Muslim world and to colonize it. By year 1900, the European imperialism had extended throughout the Muslim world. The French dominated North Africa, Lebanon, Syria. The British dominated large part of the Middle East from Palestine all the way to Iraq. The Dutch dominated in Southeast Asia. And here too, just as with the Jews, there was a very wide reaction in the Islamic world to European imperialism. There were many Muslims, in fact, who wanted to adopt European ways. And so, for instance, in Egypt in the 1800s, late 1800s, there were several, the political elite, for the most part, wanted to, quote unquote, modernize Egypt by adopting a secular school system as opposed to the Muslim school system, to set up courts that were civil courts as opposed to having courts that were run by Sharia. And also there was an attempt to separate, as much as could be done, religion and state. So that was one reaction. And then there were other Muslims who said, no, we want to have we shouldn't give up our Muslim heritage. We should combine the best of European and Muslim culture. And so you have the approach, again, sometime in the late 1800s, early 1900s, of a group that is known as the Islamic Reformers or the Islamic Modernists. Figures like Jamal al-Din al-Afghani or Muhammad Abdu, who believed that you could combine the best of Western culture and learning and Islamic culture and learning. And then on the other end, on the opposite end of the spectrum, were those who rejected European culture and values. And in fact, most ordinary Muslims in the late 1800s were in this category. Most ordinary Muslims did not relate to European culture. And eventually there would be leaders that would lead the charge against European domination and who would be the spokesman for this approach. People like Sayyid Qutb, Abu al-Mawdudi, prominent thinkers who rejected European domination. And the common belief here was that if the Islamic Empire the reason why it had declined was that Muslims had not been faithful to their religion. It had been corrupted by foreign elements. If they could just get back to the pure Islam lived by the Prophet and his companions, they could triumph over the West. Now, in the middle of this, the whole thing with Palestine was key. The Muslims, the Muslim Empire, various countries won back their independence almost everywhere by the time we get back to the 20th century. European domination and imperialism was in retreat, but not in Palestine. With Zionism and the creation of Israel, you had a huge obstacle in the aspiration of the Muslims to be liberated from European and Western domination. At first, Israel was seen as being simply an outpost of European imperialism. It became the symbol of a European imperialism that would not go away. And then, of course, in recent years, it's been American imperialism. We can just talk about Western imperialism generally. Israel is a symbol of the attempt on the part of the West to try to dominate the Muslim world. And so Muslims have united around the Palestinian cause, and yet Palestine remains in the hands of Jews. This is the best that I can do to try to explain, to try to get into the heart and the mind of Muslims. I realize that there are considerable variations. There are on the Jewish side as well, but this is my best understanding. Here is where I'd like to try to pull it all together and to note some remarkable parallels, if you don't see them already. Note that both groups have faced similar challenges. For centuries, Jewish history was defined by its insecurities, by its humiliation of being dominated by others, in particular, Christian Europe. Muslims have had similar challenges. The struggle in the last several centuries for Muslims has been to deal with the decline of the Islamic world in terms of its military and economic power. And the major symptom of that decline has been to deal in particular with European domination, very similar to the Jewish situation. Another similarity, both have focused on similar solutions. Jews have attempted to achieve their security and their dignity once again by returning to their homeland, to establish a state, by achieving independence free of European domination. It's an attempt effectively to recapture the past glories of the biblical era when Jews were free and independent. Muslims have attempted to do something similar. They've attempted also to achieve their security and their dignity once again by achieving independence from European domination as well. Here too, there is an attempt to try to go back to a previous past of the Islamic Empire. Another series of similarities revolve around the fact that both sides feel that they have fallen short of their goals, and they continue to see themselves as victims. They continue to see others as more powerful than they. So that the Jews, for instance, still feel very much threatened, very much vulnerable. They feel that the other side is more powerful. After all, there are only 14 million Jews in the world. Almost half of them live in the state of Israel. That state is surrounded by hundreds of millions of Arabs and Muslims who want to destroy them. That's the Jewish view. Muslims feel similarly. They feel that they are the victims and that the other side is more powerful. The West has dominated the Muslim world. It still dominates the Muslim world. It props up corrupt Arab governments and supports its oil interests. Palestine is in Jewish hands with the backing of the United States. Jews have the stronger army. So each side feels that it has fallen short of its goals for restoring its dignity and its security. Both groups see Israel-Palestine as the key battleground to the return to that era, to that former era of independence and dignity. Both sides see that battle as crucial for repairing the damage that was done by European imperialism, and yet both sides feel that neither one has succeeded. Each group feels that its own side has not succeeded. And both views, here's another interesting similarity, both views continue to have a complicated view of the West. Zionism, as we said, was a rejection of the Western world, a rejection of its mistreatment by the Western world, particularly by Christians in Europe. But at the same time, Jews were always attracted to the Christian world. They were always attracted to the Western world, and therefore have always had an ambivalent relationship with it. Muslims as well have fought for their independence, to be free of European imperialism and Western imperialism generally. And yet one finds that many Muslims, as I've pointed out, many Muslims were trying to find a compromise between Western values or Western culture and Muslim culture. And even nowadays, one of the things I continue to hear is from Muslims is that in some sense they still have admirations for the West, for the US, for some of its dynamism. They don't like its political policies. The view is still very mixed. And so both groups are still struggling with their relationship with the European and Western legacy. And yet, my problem is that the dialogue between Jews and Muslims does not generally get to these issues. It's almost always about immediate problems. It's about the conflict. It's about borders. Where do you draw the borders? It's about refugees. Very few discussions that I have, and I've had many of them over the years, that have involved Jews and Muslims, Israelis and Palestinians, has really gotten to the underlying psychology, which I'm trying to paint here. It is not that the immediate problems are not important. You do have to draw borders, and I, for one, I've always been a supporter of some sort of two-state solution. I'm not an expert on where exactly you draw the border and on all the details. I believe in a two-state solution, but such a solution, if it is implemented, will not solve the conflict. My prediction is that even if you were to draw the border there tomorrow and get everybody to separate themselves and have their own state, you would still have war between the two sides eventually, because you haven't addressed the frustrations, the vulnerabilities, the fears, and the underlying psychology that really goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years, certainly on the part of the Jews. You have to understand the entirety of the history on both sides. If both sides can do this, if both sides can really see into the heart and minds of the other side, maybe we can have a solution eventually to the conflict that has engulfed the Israelis, the Palestinians, more, beyond that, the Middle East, beyond that, Jews and Muslims, and beyond that, the entire world. So what I pray for is the kind of understanding that will eventually allow there to be a lasting peace in which each side really understands the other and is able to live with the other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Eisen. You have admirably explained what Zionism is and the views of the Jews and how their current views have been formed by the centuries-long prejudice against the Jews in Europe. And yet, we do not find that the Jews were discriminated to that extent in the Islamic world. The conflict between the Jews and the Palestinians or Muslims it has really a very recent history, very recent history. So I find that that perhaps we should make a distinction between Arabs and Jews and Muslims and Jews, because when we talk about Muslims and Jews, we have other issues like how peacefully Jews lived in Muslim lands for centuries when Europe was practicing this discriminatory behavior against Jews. How do you respond to that?
Well, I respond to that by saying that I disagree, and I would urge you. I realize that I've said things here that might be insulting to Muslims by making the suggestions that I've made, but all I am trying to do is to try to allow Muslims a window into the Jewish world and to understand how Jews see it. My interest here is not necessarily in telling you what was historically the case. I am telling you how Jews felt. Nobody who had the choice, nobody who would have a choice to be a first-class citizen in the Muslim world as a Muslim would choose it. Nobody who had a choice would choose being one of the dhimmi as opposed to being a Muslim in the Middle Ages. It did come with certain debilities, and Jews felt that it was humiliating to them. Mm-hmm. And even if there was peace, and even if Muslims didn't see it that way, this is the way Jews felt.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
As far as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict goes, you're right to some extent. That conflict in some ways is separate from what has come before it. But again, Jews don't see it that way. The Jews,
they should.
They should. They should. But what I am urging, you see, the point of what I'm trying to argue for is that Muslims need to hear this. They need to understand it. and they need to feel the vulnerabilities. I would ask you, Dr. Bowman, and every Muslim in this room, to try to put yourself in the shoes of Jews who have been living without their independence. Just the fact that they were living under Muslims and not free, and did not have their own independence, is something that Muslims need to understand. And they have to understand the damage that's been done to them. They have to understand that when an Iranian president threatens to destroy Israel, that they see Hitler, that Arabs, Muslims, Nazis, they all look the same to them. Now you're going to tell me they're all different, and the fact is they are. But in order to understand what's going on in the Jewish heart and mind, one has to understand these feelings, and the dialogue has to begin on that basis.
Yes. I think you have done a very good job. You have admirably described the Jewish psyche. I think it's clear. Let's open to question. Yes.
Yes, my name is Marianne. My name is Marianne. I'm an Egyptian activist, human rights activist. I'm here on a fellowship with Freedom House organization,
Very nice.
which is a non-profit American organization. And my public work actually focuses on the interfaith dialogue in Egypt and in the Middle East. But in the Egyptian case, which is right now is the focus on Muslims and Christians relationship, cults mainly. And what I want to know from you, it's very important, and I'd love to thank you for this informative, point of view of the Jewish side, because where I live, we don't have, Jews don't speak out, and we have very limited number of Jews in Egypt right now. And before our national revolution, we had Christians, Muslims, and Jews used to live in harmony, and everything was just fine. And we had one of our famous theatrical plays that's called Hassan, Murqus, and Kohen, and that they were all live in harmony and have their own trade and their own companies, and they were all friends. And the case now in Egypt is just Hassan and Murqus, because Kohen was out of the picture after the establishment of Israel. What exactly I want to know, how would you establish how Jewish activists would establish this common ground based on dialogue, in the perspective that in the Middle East the common people actually mix between what the Jewish people and Israelis, concerning the Israeli government politics in the area, and what is known as the atrocities against the Palestinian people, and what the media work on in the Middle East. And I didn't hear from you concerning the Muslim part, and please, our Muslim friends who are here, correct me if I'm wrong, that from what I know, that there will be a final battle between Muslims and Jews, and everybody's just anticipating this battle, and every clash happens in the region. Some people actually attribute this to, it's just a preparation for the final battle between Muslims and Jews. And another part is that what Christians believe in is that at the same final battle, the Christian version of it is that all Jews were just accept Christ.
Right.
And this exact part is just making a huge problem between Christians and Muslims.
Right.
Because in Egypt, for example, some extremists consider that we do have more sympathy with Jews because we do believe that they will all come back.
Yes.
And just one more thing is that you mentioned the common grounds between Jews and Muslims is that they both suffer from the Christian tyranny.
Yes.
And I do believe that some people actually use the same speech and the same way in Egypt, talking about the common grounds between Muslims and Christians. We were both betrayed by the same Jews.
That's okay.
So
Interesting.
it's just by putting one common ground between Jews and Muslims.
Yes, very interesting.
That same reason creates a division between Christians and Muslims. We do have a very famous singer in Egypt who was talking about, it's a very famous national song, that Jesus Christ was betrayed by the same Jews who took our land.
Yes, yes.
So it's just the same reason that you just mentioned, that, you know, Christians are the bad guys. Some people in Egypt, and Christians as well, use the same thing, you know, pointing out the Jews as the bad guys, because in Egypt, Christians still have some problems with Israel, because every house lost a person in different wars. So I want to know the Jewish perspective, and I know it's a very long question.
You'll have to help me, Marianne, focus on what the question actually is. A lot of the insights that you've given here are very interesting. This last insight is fascinating, and is one that I have to think about. I'm not sure I'm going to have a quick response to you. The one thing that I can respond to, this issue of what's going to happen at the end of days, is a huge problem. And that is, yes, every group sees itself as triumphing. You didn't mention the Jews, which I'm not criticizing you for, but yes, I'll mention them in a critical way, and saying that one of the problems with Jewish messianism and their hopes for the final era is that Jews are going to live in their homeland and they're going to defeat the enemies of the Jews. The settlers on the West Bank are very much in support of that way of thinking. And so everybody's looking to the end of time when they're going to triumph. And people, the danger here is that you have people trying to help it along by waging war to kind of get the process started. My feeling is that we have to get past this. My feeling is that all of our traditions, I'm aware of the Muslim traditions, I'm aware of the Christian traditions, but I'm also aware of the fact that in all three of our faiths, there are other traditions that talk about peace and harmony between our peoples. One of the things, I don't want to talk about Islam or Christianity here, because I don't know it as well as I know Judaism, but there are also visions in the Jewish scriptures about how Jews and the rest of the world will live in peace with each other. This is another side of the Jewish tradition, and we have a responsibility to accentuate those traditions and to talk about those traditions, because if we keep going the way that we're going, there isn't going to be any world for any of us to dominate anyway. So that's my feeling, and that is that we have to look at the complexity of our traditions and accentuate the beautiful parts of it and not the bad parts. Now, there were other things you mentioned, but those are the couple of things I can comment on.
Yes, the notion of the mixture in the Middle East between Jews and Israelis, and the fact that all the Jews in the world have their loyalty to their homeland, which means their approval on the Israeli government politics.
Well, look, all I can do is ask you to get inside the heads of Jews, that when they went, let me be very direct here. What Muslims saw when they saw the pictures in Gaza was they saw the victimization of innocent Muslims. They saw the victimization of Muslims that has been going on for decades, if not centuries. They saw everything that got them angry about America on that television screen. When Jews saw that, you know what they saw? They saw Israeli soldiers representing a Jewish community that has been brutalized, that has been made to suffer for centuries and centuries of centuries, that has this one little strip of land that could be annihilated if Ahmadinejad gets his way. They saw the soldiers as heroically defending their homeland. Now, in a way, the problem is that neither side is seeing the full picture. The Jews are not seeing the fact that these are innocent civilians. The Muslims are not seeing the fact that those soldiers, despite the fact that they have their guns and their tanks, are scared to death of not being alive tomorrow, because Hezbollah or Hamas or Iran are going to destroy them. And so the more that we can understand this, perhaps the better. You know, we need to be able to educate each other about these things.
There's another question,
Yeah.
the lady in the back.
That's okay, Verna, go ahead.
No, she was first, okay? She has been raising her hand for some time, so you'll be the next.
Sure, I thought.
No, you for age here. I just wanted to try to disabuse you of your notion that that Christians hate Jews. Or there's some theological basis for that, because that's just such a sin in our tradition. I mean, we really are told that we are sort of grafted in the vine and adopted Jews, essentially. Spiritual Jews is what we consider ourselves. That's the theological tradition. And there's been a whole history documented of priests who went to the concentration camps, who were hiding Jews and protecting Jews, and you know, the whole martyr tradition of giving, you know, there's saints that were made saints because they gave their lives for Jews, right?
Yes.
So I just wanted to disabuse you of that, and now the Pope is in Israel.
Sure.
I wanted
Could
to
you keep your questions
Yeah,
short?
yeah.
Yeah, what's your question?
I was just asking if you had been following his progress, because he was going to.
Oh, look. First of all, you don't. Yeah. Yes.
Whether he's done anything that you think was a
Oh.
faux pas, or what he could have done better.
First of all, you don't have to disabuse me. I know that there are wonderful Christians in the world. I have worked with them. I have met literal, I'll call them saintly individuals who are who are as holy as any Jew, holy as any Jews that I have ever met. There are wonderful Christians in the world. There is a side to Christianity that is about love and is about peace and is about respect for Jews. But two things. First of all, what I'm talking about, again, are perceptions. One has to acknowledge the perceptions that Jews have of Christianity being the victims of Christian suffering for centuries. You can't get around that. Secondly, and this is the hard part, there's so much to cover I couldn't really cover all this in a half an hour. All of us have to look at the people in our tradition who have perpetrated violence and understand that that's also part of our tradition. And I'll say that as a Jew. There are Jews that I am ashamed of. There are Jews who perpetrate violence that I am ashamed of. There are settlers on the West Bank who despise Arabs, who want to kill them, and I'm ashamed of them. I have to acknowledge the fact that they are reading my tradition in another way. And all I would say to you is that you and I have no problem. If it were up to you and me, there would be no problem between Christians and Jews. But you also have to acknowledge that in the past, and even in the present, there are Jews who have terrible prejudices against, there are Christians who have terrible prejudices against Jews. Now, in terms of the Pope, I'm not an expert on what the Vatican is up to, and I'm not an expert on this Pope. I think that there's been a mixed record here with the Pope. The Pope, I think, on the one hand, has tried very hard and has continued the legacy of the last Pope in trying to forge good relationships with the Jewish community. And in some ways, he has done an admirable job. However, there have been some slip-ups, as we all know. It's been in the newspapers of trying to canonize or trying to bring back into the Catholic fold a clergyman who denies the Holocaust. I think it's too early for me to make a judgment on these things. I hope and pray that the Pope will continue to cultivate good relationships with the Jews and will understand some of their sensitivities. And I think that he's done a pretty good job at trying to go back on that on that mistake that he made with regard to this particular clergyman. But it's still very early, So I would say I'm cautiously optimistic that this Pope, as he learns his way along and as he continues to reach out to the Jewish community, that the relationship will be a solid one.
Next question.
Okay. Werner, hi. I fully subscribe to your initial views on the issue of both sides, Muslims, Jews, had been victims of the Christian West, which indeed is a similarity which nobody can deny. And certainly also the fact that you mentioned that Jews in addition have been victims of the Muslim domination. And I also subscribe to the point, perceptions probably are the most important elements. Often facts are only facts through perception, and they differ. And I also understand and follow your line of presentation on the Gaza two realities of Gaza Strip, where I think, and I might have missed it, where you kind of appeared, in fact, to the Muslim side to understand it, rightfully. It has to be understood, the whole history of the Jews. Where I miss something is that you tell me what Jews have to understand. You now just take the Muslim side. There was nothing. If I didn't.
No, I think I did, Tamari. I think
now
I.
you appeal to the point. You Muslims understand. Both sides we were victims of the Christians. on the point. Second, we Jews have been victims of the Muslim domination, second-class citizens. All facts, all truths. Now, I would have said, now what should, in order, because you said you went through the exercise for the purpose of helping to stake out a new path and bring peace, understanding between the two sides, primarily the Middle East, where I at the moment would say,
can you state your question, please?
That's the question. What do the Jews have to understand on the Muslim side?
I think a lot. I think I think I did address this when I addressed Marianne's question. The Jews have to understand that when they go into Gaza and when they wage war, and we don't even have to go with the issue of Gaza, just the fact that Israel exists is a huge black eye for Muslim identity, for the identity of Muslims, because it's the symbol, as I said, of Western imperialism, of the U.S. having taken a territory that Muslims regard as their own and dominating it. And there's this feeling that, that it's not just Israel that the West is after, that this is really a beachhead for the West dominating. Is it true? It's not true. But again, it's a perception. And Jews have to understand where that perception is coming from, and that it's because, again, of a couple of hundred years of Muslims having suffered under European domination and American domination.
Okay, we have 5 minutes and 2 questions there. The first, and then you'll go next.
Hello, my name is James French. My name is James French, and I wanted to go back to a point that you made earlier about perception really being the most important factor in the dialogue here. There were some disagreements that were really about historical facts, and your response to that was that that's not really the point today. The point is to portray what the perception is on the other side.
Right.
Looking forward, though, what would you suggest is then the way to come to a resolution? Should the two sides merely exchange perceptions, or is there another approach that you're suggesting? And would that approach be indicated by religious belief? Would religion itself be able to encompass the other's perception, or is there some secular mode of dialogue that you're thinking of?
Those are two very difficult questions to answer. I think that a lot would be accomplished if you did. It's amazing what words can do. So I would say that the exchange of perceptions would certainly be an excellent beginning. If an Israeli prime minister were to get up and to say, we acknowledge the fact that that what we've done is wrong, say. We acknowledge the fact that when Zionists came to the Muslim world, that we were stepping on toes. Well, actually, that's too mild. We were impinging. We were invading a territory that was meaningful to a group of people called Palestinians, as well as to the Arab and Muslim world in general. We understand that. We can't turn back the clock, but let's first of all ask for your forgiveness. And secondly, try to find a way for there to be reparations in terms of, there's the issue of refugees. There's the issue of rebuilding. There are still mosques from 1948 that are lying in disrepair. There would be an incredible symbolic gesture if Israel were to repair those mosques that were destroyed. So that could be done. And of course, on the Islamic side, you could have Muslims acknowledge the fact that they waged war against the Jewish people, that they wanted to annihilate Israel without understanding the sensitivities and the meaning that land has for Jews, and that they too should ask for forgiveness. And there too, there might be gestures that one could imagine. For instance, Muslim countries providing reparations for the Jews that were kicked out of Muslim countries when the State of Israel was established. There's also a Jewish refugee problem of sorts. Religion could certainly play a role here as well, but I know we're running out of time.
One more person to go.
Yeah, I come from a Jewish background and a Holocaust surviving family, so this is very fresh and very real for me.
Yes.
The question is, given the Holocaust, where I think the greatest tragedy is not just what was done to us, but what we did to each other to survive. That's what really haunts
Yes.
many people that are survivors of it. And of course, when we descend down to the level of survivor, and we're playing island, like who's voted off the island, who survives and who lives and dies, the question is, how far will we go in our survival? And beyond a certain point, can we still consider ourselves ethically Jewish?
Yes.
I'm not trying to moralize.
Yeah.
Because I realize if you've been placed in a survival mode, you will have a very different way of looking at things than someone who is not, is just philosophical.
Yeah.
The question is, how far will we survive? And the other thought is also about religion and how it can be weaponized. If you remember the anthrax in DC here, there's a natural anthrax, which is maybe the violence that is in religion. I think that it is there, we have to look at it. But then there's the weaponized form of it and how it mixes with nationalism. So again, the question is survival, nationalism, ethics.
Ethics is always involved here, but it's ethics, again, tied in with perceptions. Just because you're right or you're wrong isn't the issue here. It's being able to talk to people's hearts and not just to appeal to certain ethical principles. So I think ethics is also mixed with trying to, with love. It's not just a question of justice, it's also a question of reconciliation. That's one point that I want to point out that I think is very important as we move forward. How far are we willing to go really ties into what I've just said. And that is, I hope we don't go too far. In other words, yes, you can't turn back the clock. I don't think that the state of Israel should just disappear because it did something wrong 60 years ago, and you've got not only half the Jewish people living there, but also Jews throughout the world tied up. Their entire identity is tied up with this. So you can't just dismantle the state of Israel, but the state of Israel could do a lot in order to reconcile in a way that it's not doing. And so my simple answer is, I hope they don't go too far. I mean, yes. And maybe, maybe I'll even take this in another direction. Perhaps the best way to survive is not to beat down the other, not to treat every Palestinian like they're a potential Nazi, but in fact to try to make peace, because I'm convinced that if Israel continues on the path that it is of using only a military solution to all of its enemies, and as much as I understand that if it only uses that means, that Israel may not survive. I think its best hope for survival is paradoxically not to be powerful militarily, and to try to find a way to change the nature of the dialogue to forgiveness, reconciliation, and on the basis of the things that I've talked about today.
We thank Professor Eisen for his insightful presentation and comments, and this concludes the session and his presentation. Jews and Muslims, what they have more in common than they realize. And thank you for coming, and thank you for your questions.